Well, it is time for us to get started. If you would be finding a place to have a seat and be opening up your Bibles to John chapter 4, and we will continue our study from John chapter 4. We spent the last couple of weeks talking about Jesus with the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, and ended last week talking about the different principles about evangelism that you can find in John chapter 4 and that whole account with the woman at the well. And one of the things that I typically do, excuse me, are you too close? Does that smell? No. Anyway, when you own mom and daddy, I mean, I tell you. I don't remember where I was at now. Oh, one of the things I usually do is I go back and I look at, because I always, I'm studying ahead of where we end up getting to, and with teaching the Thursday class and the Wednesday class, I'll go back and look and see where we got to. And last week I had on khaki pants and I had on a shirt and I had on a khaki vest. And from that camera up there, it looked like I had on a pair of khaki bibbed overalls, and which I'm fine with bibbed overalls, but anyway, so I decided to wear something bright tonight so that I'd at least look bright, whether I am or not. So we're glad you're here. We're going to be looking at the end of chapter 4, and I hesitate to say this because when I do, it usually ends up being way long, but I think it'll be a shorter class tonight because I don't want to get into chapter 5. Chapter 5 has so much, and I don't really want to break it up in the middle of the first half of it, and we'll spend probably a couple of weeks on chapter 5, but we'll talk about what happens with chapter 5, and then we'll talk about the fallout from what happens at the end of the chapter. But this is kind of a transitional passage at the end of chapter 4. I think that's the way, of course, remember, when it was originally written, it wasn't divided up into chapters, and so don't let the flow stop or end just because of a chapter. I think part of what's going on, because we've talked about how that these signs that Jesus is performing, there's this kind of a punchline to it. There's a hidden meaning or a deeper meaning, a spiritual meaning about it that explains Him. And there's not really one with what we're going to talk about tonight per se, but I think it goes along with what goes on in chapter 5. It's a different healing, but this healing and chapter 5's healings John has put together, and I think it's important. I also think it's a transition between the way the reaction of the people was in Samaria to what we're going to see when Jesus gets to Galilee. Before we get into the class, though, what are the two verses you have to know to understand the Gospel of John? 20, 30 through 31 is right. Many signs truly it is Jesus, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, and believing have life in His name. And so these signs are to help us to understand who Jesus is. And that's going to be the case tonight, especially with a short account in John's Gospel here, but a really cool couple of lessons, I think, that comes from it as we study through it. So we're going to back up. Mama said we got to 45. We're going to back up to 43 and talk about that a little bit before we move on. But it says after the 2 days, and the 2 days, if you draw a line up to verse 40, that's how long that He stayed with the Samaritans. After the 2 days that He stayed with the Samaritans, He departed for Galilee. And you remember back at the beginning of chapter 4, that's how all of this began, was Jesus was going from Judea to Galilee. And we've showed you this map a couple of times, but you remember Galilee is up in the north, Samaria is in the middle. I'm not even showing up there, am I? You're looking at what iMusic selection you want to make here, and let's see here. And it's still not showing up there. So let's try it again. And there it is. There's the map, though. Galilee up in the north, Samaria in the middle, and then Judea down in the south. And I don't know how well you can see, but right in almost the very center of Samaria is where Sychar is, which is the village that right outside of it is where Jesus stopped and had this conversation at Jacob's well, right outside of where Mount Gerizim is, which she asked about. But you remember in chapter 4 it said that Jesus had to go through Samaria, and we talked about he didn't have to, how many would go around Samaria to get to Galilee. But Galilee is it's the more rural kind of area. It's kind of backwards from the way America is, that in the south is the rural, country folk. In Israel, it's the north that is the rural country folk and lots of agricultural land and that type of thing. But that's where Jesus is heading, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But he's going... It says he came again to Cana in Galilee in verse 46. That's where he's ultimately going. But he's going up to Galilee, heading north up there. For Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his own hometown, which is very true. It's oftentimes, and I'll be honest, it's one of the things that what's concerning about us coming back to Weakley County. In part, I think part of the reason why is just because it's, all of these people had seen Jesus grow up. They remembered little Jesus, little teenage Jesus, little toddler Jesus, the little things the awkward moments that he had. And how many times have we seen the Gospels where they say, is not this the son of the carpenter? I mean, we know who he is. He can't be the Messiah. And it's hard for us sometimes to accept somebody that we really know and listen to what they say, especially when they're younger, And I've talked about before how many connections that we have here in this congregation. Coach Hollowell was my basketball coach. Miss Harris was my French teacher, and Mr. Capps was my scoutmaster, and all of these different individuals Mr. Barber was my junior high principal, and sometimes I tell stories and they don't remember it, and then I think I probably shouldn't have told that. I was telling about the first spanking I got in school that I remember at least. Mr. Barber gave me for not doing my spelling write-offs, and he's like, I don't remember that at all, And I'm like, well, no, it was Bradley that you gave a spanking to, not. But it's hard to maybe accept that Jesus, I remember that he was an awkward teenager. I remember when he was a little boy climbing a tree, and now you're saying he's the Messiah? He was a good kid, come from a good family, but how could he be the guy? And at the same time, it ought not be that way. It ought to be that there's a level. We hadn't been here very long. I remember when Danny one day said, I think y'all just fit in really good here. And I said, I grew up 8 miles from here. If I don't fit in here, I'm not going to fit in anywhere, But with the relationships ought to come better ministry. And it ought to come, a better family feel when you have deeper and longer relationships with each other. But he's telling us this not just because he's reporting the facts of what's going on, but because of what he's really fixing to get into here. Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his hometown, and this is his home region that he's going to up in Galilee. You remember all the way back in chapter 1 that when Philip's telling Nathanael about Jesus, he says, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? This area wasn't known for producing great scholars. And so there's lots of those kinds of things that's working against Jesus to a certain extent. But it says when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they too had gone to the feast. So they welcomed him. But why did they welcome him? Yeah, these miraculous things that he had done. How many miracles did he perform while he was with the Samaritans? Why did they follow him? Remember they told the woman, why was it that they believed in Jesus, that he was the Savior of the world? Because of what he taught. And see, it was not enough just to hear Jesus teach for these Galileans. They were impressed by the things that he did, and it almost became kind of like a sideshow deal. It was almost that, the people were falling in love more with the miracles than they were the miracle worker, which is a shame, And sometimes we can be guilty of that. We can be so impressed with the miracles that Jesus performed, and they should impress us. That's the purpose of the signs. But how impressed are we by the things that he tells us to do, and who he was and his character and that type of thing? And so it's interesting. You see this over and over in the gospel accounts, though, how often it is that the people who you would think would be the least likely to accept Jesus are the ones who readily do, and the ones who you would think would be the most readily accepting of Jesus are the last ones to do so. So he comes to Galilee. They welcome him because of the miracles that they had seen. They wanted to see more, and that's why they welcome him. So verse 46, he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. At Capernaum, there was an official whose son was ill. So we talk about this point between Capernaum and Cana. These are two of the cities that we see in Galilee. Pull up the map over here again. You've got Capernaum is right up here at the very top of in fact, I've got it pulled up. Yeah, here it is. You can kind of see here, up here on the top right, at the very top of the Sea of Galilee, is where Capernaum is. Down here on the left, where that red arrow is, it's actually called Kfar Kana now, but that's where they assumed the city of Cana was at that time. And you can see it's 37.5 kilometers, about 25 miles, about an 8 to 12 hour walk, about a day's journey. And those two places become significant because of the miracle that Jesus had already performed in Cana. And then you've got Capernaum, which is kind of Jesus. We talked about this when we studied the Gospel of Mark. Jesus kind of adopted Capernaum as his home base during his ministry. It's the city where Matthew was from, where Peter and Andrew and James and John were from. It's right there on the banks of the Sea of Galilee. And of course, they had a fishing business there. It was really one of my favorite places, this area, to go to. When you're in Jerusalem, there's some ancient things, and there's some places you can go underground and some things that they've dug up. But Jerusalem has been destroyed and built on top of so many times. There's places that you're 30 foot above where it was in the first century. And Israel is a very modern city. And to me, at least, I don't know about Johnny, Danny, Ron, I don't know about y'all, but it didn't really feel like I was where Jesus was for the most part when I was in Jerusalem. When I was in Galilee, out in the country, that felt like, there's 4-lane highways and cell phone towers, but you still kind of feel like this is kind of what the topography looked like. When you're out on the Sea of Galilee, you really felt like that. And when we went to Capernaum, and that basically entire little village has been unearthed. By the way, I was the only person there with a camouflage hat and camouflage pants on that day. But anyway, when you're there, you kind of feel a little bit more. There's the view of the Sea of Galilee from Capernaum, and it's beautiful there. And you can see why Jesus liked spending time there. And we had the opportunity while we were there to worship. The Sunday we were there, that's where we was in Capernaum, and we worshiped. You can see behind there, this is right on the beach. There's this canopy there, and that's where we worship. That's Dan Owen preaching to us that Sunday in our worship service. And we're looking at him, but we're also looking out at the Sea of Galilee while we're worshiping. That's what they think was maybe where Peter's home was. And they've got this statue of Peter there he looks more like Aquaman than he does Peter, the way they got him muscled up. And some of the artifacts, there's the boat docks that are out there. But it's just right there on the sea. And so this was been an area that because of Jesus' involvement in that place, the man would have known about. You're a day's walk from Cana, where this wedding was, where he turned the water to wine. And so you can imagine, besides everyone being down in Jerusalem during the feast, how much people have been talking about what Jesus had done. And so people are wanting to, they're wanting to see the miracles. They're wanting to see the signs. They're wanting to see the show, so to speak. And yet there's this one man who really needs more than that. And he's very desperate because of the fact that his son was so sick. It says that there was this man that heard of Jesus come from Judea to Galilee. He went to him, asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So there was this official whose son was sick, and even to the point that he was almost about to die because of how sick that he was. And so, you think about how long of a walk that is. Of course, Capernaum right there at the sea is at sea level, and it's a pretty good incline to get from there to Cana. So he's walking uphill that long a distance. But if you've ever been in a position where you've had a child that was really sick, what would you do? Anything for that child, right? And, that's the point that he's at. And he's desperate. And you find out about this guy that's done all of these miracles and done all these things that, the average person can't. Well, I want to go see that guy and see if maybe he can do something to help my son. So this official is probably, we don't know exactly, but probably he was a synagogue official and had some sort of clout in the religious system of the Jews. But his son is so ill, he hears that Jesus could come, so he goes and he asks him to come and heal his son. He goes to Jesus and he says, I want you to come back home with me and I want you to heal my son. Now, why would Jesus have to go home with him? It's amazing. Go ahead, Johnny. Yeah, you got to do the voodoo or something, right? It's amazing when you start studying through the Gospels how many different ways that Jesus healed people. Sometimes he would, lay his hands on them. And sometimes he would spit on the ground and say, here's mud in your eye, Sometimes he would pray for them. Sometimes he would from a distance. Sometimes he would speak the word. And it's just interesting. Jesus is God. He can do it anyway. Why did he heal people in so many different ways? I don't have an answer to that. I'm not asking you to have the text and tell us, but no, I ain't got that far. But no, it's all right. But part of it is, I think he's testing them. Part of it is, though, I think he's trying to show just how much power he has in what he's doing. So, anyway, Jesus is asked if he would come back with him and heal him. And Jesus' response is really interesting. In verse 48, I've got it written above it. Jesus said to them, unless you, but the you here, again, I've told you this before, you don't have to know Greek to go to heaven. Sometimes you can find some pretty cool little gems there if you do a little research. The you there is plural. I would love, here in the South, we've solved this problem, right? One person is you. What's two or more people? I wish somebody would make a translation like that so that it was you and y'all. And if it's about 15 or more, it's what? It's all y'all. That's right. If we would make a Southern translation, it would be so much better. But anyway, in Logos, Tucker, I've got it to where all of the singular use has one line underneath it and all the plural use has two lines underneath it. So I can say you and y'all. So if you'll allow me to give you the Corey Southern version, Jesus said to them, unless y'all see signs and wonders. Who's he talking to here? Anyone in hearing distance. It sounds like he's talking to just this man. But he's not talking to just this man, is he? He's talking to him, but he's saying it to where everybody can hear, right? Matt Valley sent me this morning a picture of a breakfast sandwich. And I was so hungry. And I thought, isn't that sweet? Matt's going to bring me a breakfast sandwich. And I got here to the office. I went by, saw Jeff for a minute, and then I came to the office, and Mom and Daddy showed up. We went and looked at a house, and everybody I'm seeing, you want something to eat? No, Matt's going to bring me a breakfast sandwich. Then it got lunchtime, and Melody said, you want me to go eat something to eat? And I'm like, oh, Matt's going to bring me a sandwich. I am starving to death right now. Did you know that? Well, I'm just picking at Matt. But a while ago, I went back there and said all those same things. But I said it loud enough that everybody around him would hear because I was trying to pick at him, you know. Jesus is saying it. He's talking to the guy, but he's saying it loud enough that that's who he's really talking to. Y'all won't believe unless you see a miracle. In contrast to who? The Samaritans who heard Jesus teach and believed he's the Savior of the world. Isn't that a shame? Now you wonder why that earlier in verse 44 he tells you what Jesus had testified, that a prophet is without honor in his hometown. Well, he's showing you why he put that in there, because this is what's happened. Y'all won't believe unless y'all see signs and wonders. Y'all will not believe. They've fallen in love with the miracles and the signs rather than falling in love with the miracle worker. And this is one of those that, we look back and we look in the Old Testament and talk about the Israelites, and we look in the New Testament and we talk about all the people that's surrounding Jesus, and we say, man, aren't you glad we're not like those folks? Aren't you? I sure am. How many times do we fall in love with the miracles over the miracle worker? How many times do I only go to God when my daddy's in the hospital? Or when my wife is in the hospital? Or when I've gotten laid off or fired? Or how many times do I remember Him just for Him? See? And so Jesus is trying to make a point here with this plural, talking to the man whose son is sick, but he's really talking to them all. So the royal official responds to him. This official, verse 49, says to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." I don't know what you're talking. He would have heard it plural. See, in the Greek, it's a different word. He would have heard it plural, and he's like, dude, I don't have time for you to be telling everybody else what's going on. I need you to come with me. My son is about to die. He's focused on why he needs Jesus to come with him. So Jesus says to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. Now, we've talked about this a couple of times, about how that this progressive faith that you see over and over going on with different individuals that come into contact with Jesus. And so we see immediately that the man believed what Jesus had spoken to him, and he shows his belief in the fact that he leaves from, he's not still trying to talk him into coming with him. He leaves and he goes, but later on we're going to see that this progressive faith that's going on with what's happening here. So go, your son will live. The man believed and he went on his way. Now how hard was that? I want you to come with me to heal my son. Jesus says, go, your son is okay. Okay, if you say so, I guess. How fast do you think he ran on the way back home? Wondering, did I do the right thing? Is my son really going to be healed when I get there? But he trusted Jesus enough that he went home. And so, verse 51, as he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. Now, if you've marked your key words in John in your text, you'll notice that this word recovering is the same word back up in verse 50, go and your son will live. See how live and recovering is the same color? What he says, not that he's recovering, they told him his son was living. So it's not just that he's getting better. It's not just that the fever broke. It's your son that was about to die is living. He's up, doing what he does, just like nothing had ever happened. I mean, it's not just coincidence. It's not just happenstance. It's not just that things are progressing, but he is exactly what Jesus said. He's the opposite of what he was when the man left to go find Jesus. And so, verse 52, he asked them what hour it was when he began to get better, and they said to him, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. So he said, what time was it whenever this changed? And they said it was the 7th hour, which would have been 1 in the afternoon. And the father knew that that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live, and he himself believed, and his household. So he got home, and the boy was well, and so he says, when did this happen? 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He's thinking back saying, you know, that was when Jesus told me yesterday that he was going to be better. And so then it says, and he believed. Wait a minute. I thought he believed back in Cana. There's a different level of belief now, isn't there? It's one of those things, and I used this illustration the other day, but when I was talking with a couple, but it's one of those, and I've probably told y'all this before, but it's one of my favorite movie illustrations. Have you ever seen Raiders of the Lost Ark? I think that's the one. Aaron, you'll correct me if I got the wrong Indiana Jones movie. The one where he's in the cave with the map, and he's walking through there, and he about falls into this giant cavern that goes, you can't see the bottom of it. Which one? Last Crusade. And he looks, and it's this big giant chasm, and he looks at the map, and the map says go forward. And he looks at the map, and he looks down, and he looks at the map, and looks down, and then he finally goes and takes a step. And then what happens? There's a step there. There's a rock there, right? Well, the rock was always there, but he had to take a step before it appeared. And then that second step, he kind of paused a little bit, but it was a little bit easier, right? And then he gets to where he's just going as quickly as he wants to. That's the kind of thing that God's always there, but he's waiting on us to take that step in faith before the stone appears. And once you see that God's there, doesn't it make it easier to take that next step? And the next step, and that progressive faith that builds on what we learn about God and what we learn about his nature and what we see in our lives that he does for us. The promises that he's made, that he's kept over and over again. And so that's what's happened. Jesus tells him, go home, your son's going to be okay. And if it's Corey, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, are you sure you want me to go or not? And when he finally does, what he realizes is that what he told him was the truth, of course, but it's the idea of as you go, you're going to have these little things that builds your faith, that grows your faith. And it happened with this man. It's happened with a number of individuals that we've looked at so far in our text that that ultimately, it's that spending time with Jesus like the Samaritans did. It's that adding to, the knowledge that you have. It's seeing Him work and be active in our lives and in the lives of others that allows us to take those steps. And so, again, I don't know that there's really a punchline like there is a lot of the signs with this one, other than the fact that I think it connects with the next chapter and the healing that goes there, but it also kind of serves as a bridge to talk about the difference in the way the Samaritans treated Him and the way the people in Galilee treated Him. But think about this also, when you think about what Jesus is showing in this miracle. Jesus is approximately 25 miles or so away from where this boy is. Does space mean anything to God? The man's not going to learn about it to the next day, but does time mean anything to God? See, it's one thing to be able to do some kind of something, or you're going to see different individuals that will be healing by the power of the Holy Spirit, laying on hands and different things of that nature. But Jesus is showing that He's God in that where I mentioned earlier, why is it that He healed in a variety of ways? Well, you think about some of the miracles that Jesus performs, like the calming of the sea, and shows His power over nature. You think about this particular one, His power over space, different ways that He heals, different ways that He performs these miracles, show us a little bit more about the character of Jesus and about the power of Jesus, and ultimately the fact that Jesus is God, which is what the entire purpose of the book is, John 20, 30 through 31. So Jesus is trying to help these individuals to understand that. John's writing is to help us understand that. But when you think about this sign, ultimately what it's for, verse 53 tells us, verse 53 and 54, when he knew what hour it was, Jesus said to him, "Your son will live." He himself believed, he and his household. This was the second sign that Jesus did when He had come from Judea to Galilee. And so this is the second sign. The first sign that He did in Galilee was the Cana water to wine. Now this is the second one that He did in Galilee. But you think about this connection between the signs and people believing, which every time you see a sign and the belief that follows, you ought to connect that to chapter 20, verses 30 through 31, and how that's the purpose of it. So through chapter 4, we're approximately 20% through with the book. Now that we're a fifth of the way through, you're seeing these people that are seeing the signs, and they're coming to the point of faith, maybe not understanding fully everything about Jesus, maybe a progression that takes place over the course of some time or some actions or whatever. But as readers of the gospel, John's question for us would be, what about you? What are you thinking about Jesus as you're going through this? Are you falling in love with the signs, with the miracles? Or are you falling in love with the miracle worker? What's your faith in Him like? What is your opinion of Him, your outlook of Him, your commitment to Him looking like? So we got about 8 or 10 minutes before class should be over normally, but I thought it'd be a good time just to kind of pause and say, let's think about that for a minute and see if, now that we're at this 20% through, what questions do you have on John? If I can't answer them, Eddie will answer them for you. But yeah. Well, it's the second sign that he did when he come from Judea to Galilee. So I take that as it's the second sign that he did in Galilee, at least that John's recording for us. And he doesn't really count them once you get past this one. So I think the point is that, here, just keep looking. You're going to see more and more of these signs. But ultimately, like you say, when he gets to the end, that's what the purpose of them, he tells us. But he also tells us that there's a whole lot more that not written. In fact, he says if we wrote down everything he did, all the books in the world, the world wouldn't hold all the books that it would take to. So sometimes you'll see people that will go through the Gospel of John and they'll talk about the 7 signs of John, but I've seen a bunch of people that will tell you there's 7 signs in John, but they never have the same 7 signs in John. So there's more than 7 signs in John, I believe. But, we talked about earlier about not necessarily always that being a miraculous thing. But what are the questions? I'll try to answer it, or I'll tell you why you don't need to know. None? All right, well, we're going to end a little bit early, and we'll just spend a little time fellowshipping with each other for just a minute until the children's class is let out. I just don't want to get into chapter 5 because I want to kind of go through that, not hurrying, because I want to walk you through some things that are pretty cool there. One of the things that, again, you'll see in chapter 5 is it's kind of split up in that there's what happens, the healing that Jesus is going to perform, but then there's the reaction to that healing, and we'll probably split that up over 2 weeks. But if you would be reading chapter 5, and we'll get to that then next week. Appreciate everybody that's online, and as they're signing all that off, we'll give you a few announcements to make